6:40 p.m. Call the joint commission meeting of the Parks and Rec Commission and the Library Commission on Monday, November 15th at 6:40 p.m. Welcome to the November 15th joint meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I'd like to introduce staff and commission members present. Commission members present include Vice Chair Jennifer Baskin. I can't tell. She's not on. Okay. It's not going to help.
I can call the roll, David, if
yeah, because I can't see everybody who's in the meeting from that side.
So attending from the Parks and Rec Commission are Chair David Thomas, Commissioner Peter Joshua, Commissioner Peter Diepenbrock, and Commissioner Mark Bryman. And attending from the Library Commission are Chair David Earhart, Vice Chair Alan Cohen, Commissioner Kristen Leap, Commissioner Katie Hadrovich, Commissioner Pavneet Singh, and Commissioner Vamsi Velagapudi. Representing city staff are Library and Community Services Director Sean Reinhardt, Acting Recreation Supervisor Rhondella Howard, and Assistant Library Director Nick Shedd.
Nick is also the staff liaison for the commission. Nick, will you please take a moment and provide instructions to the commission and members of the public in attendance on how the meeting will proceed?
So the Zoom teleconference commission meetings are probably familiar to all the commissioners here. This one's a little different because it's a larger meeting. So we're really going to need commissioners to use that raise hand function on the bottom of the Zoom screen, or physically raise your hand on camera. Please try to keep your cameras on and your microphones off until you're recognized by the chair. For members of the public, a special meeting does not have a general public comment section at the beginning of the meeting like most meetings you're familiar with. There will be public comment on each item on the agenda, and the chair will call for that. If you want to make a public comment at that time, use that raise hand function on your Zoom screen. Or if you're dialing in, you dial *9 to electronically raise your hand. And once you've raised your hand and the chair is called for public comment, I can unmute you and move you over. Please state your name and your jurisdiction when you're making public comment. And public comment is limited to 3 minutes per commenter, unless the chair changes that. And I think that's all I have as far as housekeeping rules. Chair Earhart, you are muted.
Of course I am. So it's quite a large crowd tonight of commission members. So in order to kind of keep it somewhat under control, please use the raise hand signal, and or make some sort of additional motion, because I'm not sure we can see you all in the same view at the same time. So we'll have to be careful with that. And also through the beginning part of the meeting, at least, we'll be doing some Library Commission work where I'll be chairing the meeting, and then we'll transition to some Parks and Recreation Commission work where Chair David Thomas, Thomas from the Parks and Rec Commission will be chairing, and then we'll transition back to a single chair. So the first order of business that's Library Commission related will be the approving the October 18th, 2021 Library Commission minutes. Staff liaison, do we have any public comment on this item?
If you'd like to make a comment on the draft minutes from the October 18th Library Commission meeting, please use that raise hand function on your Zoom screen now. And I see no comments.
Thank you. So now the floor is open for comments or questions or clarification from the Library Commission on the minutes from the October 18th meeting. Do we have any questions or comments?
I'm just going to abstain on this as I was not at that meeting.
Okay. If there are no questions or comments, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Yeah,
I move
I
to approve.
happy to second that.
Okay. Nick, would you please take a roll call vote on the stated motion and announce the results?
I will do so. So Commissioner Leap made the motion and Commissioner Cohen seconded. Commissioner Singh, how do you vote?
In favor?
And Commissioner Velagapudi, how do you vote?
In favor.
And Chair Earhart, how do you vote?
In favor.
And Commissioner Hadrovich, you are abstaining, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
So the motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1 with Commissioner Hadrovich abstaining.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we're going to transition to the Parks and Recreation Commission business.
Okay, hi everyone. I'll take over briefly here. The first thing on kind of our agenda is to approve the minutes from the October 27th meeting. So I guess we can start off. Does anyone on the commission have any comments on it? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and I guess put this forward. I'll first this for a vote.
I think we need to call for, I'm sorry, we need to call for public comment first. Chair Thomas, sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, Assistant Director Nick, do you see any public comment for this item?
If any member of the public has a comment on the Parks and Recreation draft minutes from October 27th, please use that raise hand function now. And seeing none. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
Okay, so I'll motion to approve the minutes. Would anyone like to second that?
I will second that motion.
So Chair Thomas made the motion to approve. Commissioner Bryman seconded. Commissioner Diepenbrock, how do you vote?
Yes, approve.
And Commissioner Joshua, how do you vote?
I abstained because I wasn't present.
You can vote on it even if you aren't present, because we'll actually need your vote here.
Okay, I approve.
Otherwise, we don't have enough to pass the minutes. Sorry, normally I'd let you abstain, but we need you on this one. So thank you very much. The motion passes 4-0.
Okay, great. The second item that we're going to cover and final item is figuring out the date for our next meeting. And so I'm proposing that we have a meeting on December 8th. We have a lot of things kind of coming down the pipeline, including a review of the pickleball pilot, some information on the aquatics programming and contracting that out. More recently, there's been some interest in maybe discussing some facet of like dogs in parks. So just to stay kind of on top of things, I think it would be valuable to have a meeting in December and to kind of just narrow this in scope so that we can get through it quickly. I'm going to propose moving it to December 8th. And so before we vote, I was wondering if the Parks and Rec commissioners here, if any of the four of you cannot make a December 8th meeting.
I can't. I'm traveling that week.
I can make it.
Okay, so let me ask Assistant Director Nick, if I guess, can someone who's not going to be able to make it still vote to have the meeting then?
Sure, yeah. So you can vote with the quorum of members that you have here to move the meeting or to cancel the regular meeting of the 22nd and schedule a special meeting on the 8th. And then we'll just have to have a quorum. We'll have to have 4, which means one of the 2 members who are absent tonight will need to attend so that we can have a quorum and do the business of the commission.
Okay, great. Do any other commission members want to provide feedback on this item?
I'm wondering, did we go over, did we discuss this at our last meeting in terms of the timing? Because I'm thinking an actual month from today, maybe, which is a week later, may allow for all of us to be there. I don't know if people are going to be out of town but it's still good timing before Christmas in my mind.
Commissioner Bryman, that's a great point. I actually personally am going to be out of town the next week. And so that's why, and just to limit the scope of this discussion, given that we have, a lot of people in attendance here tonight, I thought I'd just pick one date. But perhaps just to keep things moving, we can vote on this to kind of move forward. And again, so even if a commission member won't be able to make it, if they still agree, I think with the premise that it'd be valuable to meet just so that we can kind of keep staying ahead of things on the agenda and make sure we're responding to issues that are coming up, in kind of the community in a reasonable amount of time. Then they can still vote that they believe the meeting should happen. So given that, I'm going to go ahead and motion to vote on canceling the December 22nd meeting, which we had discussed in the past. And most people, agreed with it. They weren't going to be able to make that one. And I'm going to propose in the same vote that we have the meeting on December 8th.
So we're looking for a second to the Chair Thomas's motion to cancel the regularly scheduled Parks and Recreation Commission meeting for December 22nd and to schedule a special meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for December 8th.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll second it. That's fine.
So motion made by Chair Thomas, seconded by Commissioner Diepenbrock. Commissioner Bryman, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Commissioner Joshua, how do you vote?
Yes.
So the motion passes 4-0.
And that concludes the Parks and Rec Commission business, and Chair David Earhart is going to take over now.
Thank you, Chair Thomas. Okay, so we're going to go back to the joint content at this point. And the the first item D1 will be a presentation by the Acting Recreation Supervisor Rhondella Howard on the Menlo Park Community Campus project update.
Hello, everyone. How you guys doing? Hello, public. So let me share this.
You'd be able to, Rhondella. Let me know if you have any problems.
Okay, give me 1 second. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm here just to update everybody on what's been happening with the Menlo Park Community Campus project. So as we all know, Onetta Harris is now completely demolished, the whole campus. Actually, demolition started September 16th, and that was the senior center that included the community center itself, as well as the youth center, the pool house. It's all demolished and gone. These pictures that you see now is kind of steps that it took to get them completely gone. So as I go through my my presentation, the pictures are kind of come up. So again, this was all started on September 16th when they started the demolition to bring the campus down. Construction notices were sent out to the public in May, but to the residents from the level 10 construction group, just to let people know that, hey, there's going to be some noise, maybe some trucks in and out of the area. And so those notices were sent out. Residents was also informed that the Kelly Park will still be available for those during the whole time of the construction. So throughout construction, you'll still be able to have access to the field itself, as well as Beechwood Elementary School. So that's still going on. Level 10 has been in contact with Beechwood just to keep them updated with any information regarding traffic that may interfere with the flow of school. There has been some recent things going on, but level 10 has kind of been, representatives have been in contact with the Beechwood elementary school representatives as well. The project website has been updated. So any new info, the public is welcome to go to the city's website and find out the information there. Just to give an update on the demolition, as you can see here, all demolition will be proceeding in such a way to make sure that it's in coordinates and that the recycled usable building materials will be reused and refurbished. So example, all concrete will be grounded and recycled and placed as an underlayment for the whole for the site, which is one. All steel will be sent out, resmelted, so it could be reused to actually bring the building up. So that's another thing. Also, all the other building materials, such as all the other building materials, will be sorted, tracked, reused, recycled in accordance with the city's zero waste policies. Lastly, with this is that all trees have been marked and preserved. So throughout the whole construction, there are trees that'll be preserved throughout this whole time. That'll kind of be taken care of through this whole procedure. So level 10, Meta, not Facebook, but Meta is really kind of working to make sure that all waste is reused and disposed in the right way. With that being said, now that the building is down, the next thing that's happening is our interim services. So during construction, we still have our services that's happening over there. So when we talk of services, we have our youth center, which is still being used. We have a portable that's placed in the back of Kelly Field in the parking lot structure, where kids are still being able to attend our after school program. So that's still up and running. Some recreation classes that's being ran out of the Belhaven library. So here you see our Aztec dance group, but we also have Zumba as well. We also have Spanish speaking classes, and we just included our soul line dance class for seniors. So classes and services are still being, even though they're at a minimum phase right now, but classes and recreation for the community is still up and running. Aquatics program is still available. It's just that, of course, it can't be done at Kelly Park or on Netta Harris campus. So all aquatic classes will be held is being held at Burgess at this moment. And then also our senior center. Our senior center is also being relocated to our Burgess campus. So they're still doing great things over there. As you can see here, this is a senior yoga class that's been happening for some time now. They just finished a Day of the Dead event. They had a Veterans Day event. So classes are still up and rolling. And then also, like I said it before, you still have access to Kelly Field. So the field is still available. The basketball courts are still available, as well as the tennis courts. And then level 10 actually constructed a pathway for city goers or park users to exit in and out in a safe way. So it's actually there too for our kids that we pick up to take to the back to the portable. So So throughout the whole project, the amenities of the park is still available. So none of that is stopped. And like I said, our interim services are still going, and they're all pretty packed. So it's pretty good to see that happening. Before I get to that photo, I also wanted to talk about some of the new amenities that'll be with the new facility that's coming up. The Menlo Park campus will include such a new recreation center, a gymnasium, a new senior center, a dining hall, after school care center, as well as a fitness center, and of course, a new pool. So, oh, and I forgot to mention, I'm so sorry, Sean and the Library Commission, we will have a new library, a new maker space, a new teen space as well. So there's going to be a bunch of great new amenities within this new building. 2023 is going to be a great year for the city of Menlo Park. Also with the new facility, it will be all electric. And so, and it'll include some solar panels that'll sit on top of the building. That'll kind of draw all energy. And so it'll be renewable, reusable, and it'll be on site. And it'll be at a standard that will allow it to be designated as an emergency shelter as well, if there happens to be some type of state of emergency. So the new facility will be a host as a shelter if that was to happen. And like I said, this new facility is set to be open in 2023. With that being said, we recently had a groundbreaking ceremony a couple Saturdays ago. So November 6th, we actually had a groundbreaking ceremony, which included Mayor Combs, Vice Mayor Nash, and the rest of the city council. Invites were also extended to community stakeholders such as Cheryl Bims, Rose and Rachel Bickerstaff, Meta staff, formerly known as Facebook, Level 10 staff, and State Assembly member Mark Berman, and Juan Salazar, who was there representing State Senator Josh Becker. As you can see, we had a fair amount of people. I would guess around 100 attendees that attended. The event included, this is what the site looks like now, totally demolished. But this event included speeches from Mayor Combs, council members, Level 10 construction staff, Meta staff, and our stakeholders, Rachel and Rose Bickerstaff. The ceremony concluded with the ceremonial shoveling with the mayor, vice mayor, all the council members, city manager Starla Robinson, State Assembly, Mark Berman, staff from Meta staff, community stakeholders, which you can see here. And also we were able to give out small pottery shovels for all the attendees. So they were able to actually kind of be a part of history and go ahead and shovel some dirt into one of the trees. That'll be the first tree kind of planted once the building is up and running. So great ceremony, great attendance. It really was a good turnout. It was really smooth. So that was kind of a big thing for the community. A lot of people showed up. I was really impressed with that. So those are kind of my updates for the Menlo Park Community Campus. And we're super excited about it. From what I'm hearing from the community, those that I've been in contact with, staff members have been working diligently to kind of keep some type of normalcy with the members of the community. So as tough as it is, we're trying to make it as normal as possible through this transition. But once the transition is complete, I'm pretty sure it'll be a nice outcome and a huge success for the community. So that's my update.
Thank you, Rhondella. Appreciate that update. At this time, I'd like to ask the staff liaison if there are any public comment on this item.
Sure. If any member of the public would like to make a comment on this item, the presentation that Rhondella just made, go ahead and raise your hand using the raised hand function in Zoom, or if you're dialing in, press *9 now. And I see no comments. Whoop, hang on. I see a comment. Pam Jones has a comment. Ms. Jones, should be able to talk now if you would like to address the commissions.
Thank you and good evening, and thank you, Rhondella, for your report. If any of you were unable to attend the groundbreaking, there are excellent articles in our newspaper, which is the Belhaven News. And it also article appeared in Menlo. I think it was yesterday. I think you remember that my last paragraph, when I talked to you on the 18th of October, was that my greatest fear is the programming for the shiny new campus will be designed to attract people from outside the community and city. As you are aware, that has been the major complaint prior to this project. It is difficult for the neighborhood residents to use the gym, pool, and Kelly Field. When I look at the report, it seems to me that first of all, it negates that we have this center being built by Facebook due to residents within the community that worked with Facebook over a period of time. And my understanding is it's first for the community and then everybody else. And I noticed that the language here is changed so that we in the community come after outside people, the rest of Menlo Park. And again, that is disturbing. And that's exactly what happens when there is something that everybody else wants, that they will go in and take the shiny new object. Specifically, on the second page, it says, fulfills the mission of a multi-generational community center that delivers high quality services, programs in a way that is inclusive for all Menlo Park residents. Not a peep in there about the Belhaven residents. And by the way, if you look at the 5th chapter in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it refers to this center as the Belhaven Multi-Generational Community Center. So this has been on the table for a while. The other thing is the next bullet says, fosters a sense of belonging, safety, and welcome to all visitors, especially to the neighborhood residents. Neighborhood residents should be first. And I'm expecting that all of the services there will be made easy and available for community residents. Unlike what we've had with the pool, with using the field, that occurs today. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comment. If anyone else would like to make a comment, please use that raise hand function now. And there will be an opportunity to make a comment on the staff report that Ms. Jones was talking about. That's coming up next. I see no other comments.
Thank you.
Mayor Earhart.
At this time, I'd like to take advantage of the joint meeting and open the floor up for joint commission discussion on the presentation that we just shared. And so with that, I'll open up again, being a little bit of discipline about using the raise hand button if possible. And if we're not getting your attention, if you're not getting our attention, then something may be more visible in terms of your video feed there. Any questions, comments, clarification from the Joint Commission? I guess I'll start it off.
Let's
raise my hand.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there's two of them.
Sorry, I should call out. I realize you're having a little trouble seeing everybody there, Chair Earhart. Yep. Commissioner Leap has their hand raised, and then Commissioner Bryman has his hand raised.
I just wanted to echo what Pam says, like that's the community that we've been working on getting a library for, since before I joined the commission, and they need to be prioritized. Thank you, Pam.
Commissioner Bryman, if you want to go ahead.
Hey, Rhondella, thanks so much for the presentation. Can you just remind me, what is the target delivery date for this project?
So I believe it was 18 months But now with the pandemic, I think we're looking 2023 now. Where can I can put you in the time frame? I would say somewhere spring, late spring. But with the possibilities of it being later. So 2023, mid-spring, late spring.
And the general understanding is that this is a Menlo Park city project, correct?
Yes.
Thanks.
I have my hand up.
You're the chair, so you get to talk.
Okay,
There
my
aren't
bad. I
any
thought
other
you were
hand- there aren't any other
thought you were
hands up.
adjudicating.
There aren't any
So,
other. hands.
So I would like a little bit of clarification, Rhondella. In your presentation, you described new amenities, or it seemed like the characterization, it seems like the newness is the new building. Are there any actual incremental functionalities coming into the facility? I mean, or is this simply replacing in kind, obviously an updated building and a not to mention, I just wonder, is there anything that's new coming into the terms of the functionality or what's being delivered in the joint facility?
Well, I would say with that, as far as the functionality, is still to be determined as we're working towards that. But right now, it's just kind of what was is just being updated. But once we get deeper, we're still making and putting things together for the functionality. And if Sean or Nick can piggyback off of that, I think we're still at a stage where we'll be kind of gathering stakeholders, staff members, to actually to better put a sense on the functionality of the building itself. So that's still to be determined, but it's coming sooner than later. And it's something that's been on our plate that's kind of top of the list as of lately, yes.
Thank you, Rhondella. And if I may add, Chair Earhart, just to remind the commissions that one of the aspects of this project, if you will, was early on a decision made to seek exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act for this project, what's often called a CEQA exemption. And in order for the City Council to declare a CEQA exemption for this project, it needs to meet certain criteria set forth by the state in the California Environmental Quality Act. One of which is to not increase the impacts beyond what kind of currently exists in the current facility, right? So in that regard, the design of the project is really intended to kind of stay within those parameters. That's why the facility is not significantly larger in size than the previous facility if you combine all the parts, including the library. And the functions, the main functions are essentially the same. Now that said, they've been re-envisioned, reimagined, and they're in a new, very synergistic combination. So in that regard, as we as a community, and in particular with the neighborhood residents, kind of define what that programming might look like, I think there are a number of opportunities for some really kind of new and exciting things. But just to be clear, the building itself is kind of within those confines of not being substantially more impactful from a CEQA perspective than the previous one.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any more questions, comments, clarification from the commissions?
Like Commissioner Bryman has his hand up, and Commissioner Singh after him.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add that my understanding was that the general facilities, the fields, the tennis courts, the basketball is really certainly not being demolished. It's currently available for use. Is that to suggest that none of that gets touched or affected with respect to this new program? And would CEQA have anything to do with an additional tennis court, for example? I know we're redoing the pool.
Yeah, great question. Since the project, the Menlo Park Community Campus project, and that's just the working name for the project, it doesn't touch the field, it doesn't touch the tennis courts, it doesn't touch the basketball courts. So those aren't considered parts of it from a CEQA perspective. At a later time, I think the intent and part of the Parks and Rec Facilities Master Plan is to ensure that those facilities are maintained. If those are touched, then CEQA could potentially apply if they were going to be like changed. So, but no, they're not part of this project.
Thanks.
Commissioner Singh, if you had a comment.
It was actually a question. Curious to get to Ms. Jones's concern that she raised. In the preparation for this announcement and process over the next 3 years, did the city conduct sort of surveys on who would use this, what other facilities they use to accomplish the same goals, whether it's Arriaga or the library in downtown? And did they map it to like projected population growth? Like what is sort of driving the concern, other than this is a new facility and it may attract new people? Like, do we know with confidence that that people have already expressed desire that they would go there instead of the facilities that already exist?
Mr. Howard has been really integrally involved in the operations of the Oneida Harris campus prior, and can probably speak a little bit to kind of the backstory of where that concern sort of comes from. And then we could talk a little bit about looking forward. Before I turn it back over to Mr. Howard, I do want to note for the commissions that we do have another item on the agenda that actually does kind of start to go into some of this detail. So some of those questions may be answered by the following presentation. But please, Rhonda.
Yeah, so I'm in a unique situation that not only to be a member and to actually grow up in the neighborhood, to see kind of the changes happen. And when you say, are the Belhaven residents using what's there? Yes, they are. But with the change that's happened in Menlo Park, the change that's kind of growing within Menlo Park, they kind of get weeded out. And so it happens like that. And my job is to make sure that, as Ms. Leap said, to make sure that our residents get their due share, right? And so I just want to make sure that I instill that, and that I make sure that the direction of what this new center is going to be, make sure that it directly impacts the Belhaven community. And that's kind of where I sit on that. But as of lately, when Oneida was still up, it was being overbearing by Facebook users. I guess you can say because of the traffic time, they would come over there, or just to let things calm down. Then we started to grow. It happened like that, and it felt like some of the original users were getting pushed out. But with this new building, it's going to attract new customers. It's a given fact. But as long as I'm there, I just want to make sure that that we stay grounded on what started this community, which was Oneida Harris Community Center, which played a huge staple in the community. And I just want to make sure that that's what happens when this new community center is up. So it's an uphill battle, but it's a battle that I think Sean, Nick, and some of these community members that's been outspoken about what's going on. So it's going to be a battle, but it's something that definitely can be within our grasp. So that's kind of the origin, or kind of somewhat of the history of as of lately, with Facebook moving in. So we'll continue to fight for that, but it has been it has seemed like that. Like, I can't say it doesn't seem like that, but being able to see a familiar face, being able to see kids that use that center is what's going to drive the Belhaven community to stay relevant and stay in the new center once it's built.
Mayor Bryman has his hand raised.
I'm trying to understand the scope of this potential problem. If this is for the community members, is that inclusive of all Meta employees because they happen to have a headquarters in Menlo Park? I'm confused. What's the?
No, that's not the case. When we say Meta users, and then you say, hey, who's helping us build this building? Oh, it's Meta. Then sometimes they come and they, I would say they kind of use their weight around, but that's not the case. And it's not inclusive, but it may seem like that to some of our users because Facebook has impacted the community in a way that makes some uncomfortable. And so it's not inclusive for them. It's not inclusive but it should be inclusive for the Belhaven residents that's been there, that's kept that place going. And so, no, but it could feel like that because of what's been happening. So if that kind of answers or kind of gives you an aspect of the question you just asked, Mr. Bryman.
Well, it would seem to me that, as you suggest, the facility is one thing, and then how we plan the activities of the facility is something else. And then we're still in that process. And I think it's our job to suggest that, okay, these are the priorities for our, we feel that these are particular priorities and that the community members, the residents need to be first. And somehow we have to, I think, strategize in that way so that, no one's ever, there's never 100% happiness here, right? But at the same time, we need to keep our eye on the prize and figure out what it is that, why are we doing this? Yes, we appreciate the help. We appreciate the brotherhood, but this is within, the Menlo Park community, specifically Belhaven. I don't think it's a smart move to have people say, well, wait a minute, you're from the west side, therefore you can't come in and use the facility. That's not going to work. And
that's not the case. I think the case is making sure that it's still within arm's reach, right? Usually when you get a new building, you get prices go up. And so we want to make sure that the classes and everything that's being offered out of this facility is still within arm's reach. Everything around us is skyrocketing when it comes to prices. And Onetta Harris campus has been kind of a jewel for those underprivileged families, underprivileged kids to be able to still say, hey, at least I can do this. And so at the end of the day, when this is up, we just want to make sure that they can say, hey, I remember when it was this and now it's this, and I still have the opportunity to do what it is that I did before. And it's brand new, right? It's new amenities, it's updated. So that's kind of more of where we're at. We just don't want this new community center to say, hey, money, it's a money grab, right? We want them to say, whatever we were doing before is still here, and it's not going to change because it's a new building. We're still going to be rooted the same way. We're still going to be inviting the same way. And we're still going to, at the same time, we're going to add new things that's going to make us advance, not only as a community, but as a whole, right? So that's kind of what I see it as. I don't want it, like I said, I don't want our users that's been there to kind of feel like, hey, now we can't use it because it costs too much to go swimming. Where swimming was $2, and now are we charging $10 for a person to swim? No, it should still be the same. So those are the challenges that we'll have. But like I said, with the help of Nick and the help of Sean and members like Pam Jones and other community members, we'll make sure that is still within arm's reach, that they can still be serviced the way that they were. And I think that's the biggest thing.
I can tell you this, that as a Parks and Rec commissioner,
Mhm.
Chair Thomas and I just had a meeting about our sort of goal setting and creating language around that. When you say inclusive, that's what you mean, that we're including people, and we're not trying to we're not giving the community an opportunity to be left out because it's new and shiny, right? And if it's a revenue issue, right? People of a certain revenue stream don't have to pay, whatever. But we need to keep that in mind as we're setting these rules, not as we're building the building, but as we're setting the sort of the parameters of use.
Commissioner Hadrovich has her hand raised, and then Commissioner Leap after her.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple clarifications, I think, and I may not be getting this right, but is one of the concerns that you're talking about that Facebook employees who are not necessarily Menlo Park residents at all were using the facility to such an extent that community members were not able to use it? And then secondly, I'm wondering if you're talking in part about concerns related to some past policies where, for example, I'm thinking of some of the fields from a while ago when my kids were young that would be rented out, the pools maybe in the fields rented out to outside groups to the extent that neighborhood kids would not be able to have access at all, just because they were always being used by groups that were paying for them. And is that the concern that you're talking about now? So those are really just clarifications, and maybe both of these issues are going to come up in the next program. So that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yes and yes. To keep it short. Yes.
Commissioner Leap.
So Belhaven has been asking for an appropriate library that meets the needs of all the people in the neighborhood for like decades. I know when I taught in Belhaven, there was a great children's library that was attached to the school, and we were so thankful for that. But it didn't meet the needs of the entire community, which is a problem. And some people were restricted from being able to get over to the main library. And so I think that the reason for prioritizing Belhaven residents in the founding documents of the new center is kind of to ease that pain and to build a bridge with the residents who didn't have the same or didn't necessarily have the opportunity, like kids who, couldn't bike to, use whatever was available at the main municipal Burgess area, or adults who, for whom it took like a half hour on the bus. And maybe, that may have been prohibitive. So I think that the reason that Pam and Rhondella and others have brought up the importance of prioritizing use by Belhaven residents is that history and a desire to provide a neighborhood with facilities that are appropriate for Menlo Park residents.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to make a recommendation, unless there's a motion to be made here in terms of some action that the the two individual commissions want to make or proposed actions for the joint commissions. I'm going to make the recommendation that we advance to the study session report out, and then return to the questions, clarifications with the potential that what we're going to hear next might address some of the concerns that were raised, potentially raising some additional ones, but potentially may close out some things we've been discussing now. Is that fair? Okay. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Sean then.
Thank you, Chair Earhart. Can everyone see the presentation? It says anticipated timeline and sequence, etc.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, great. Okay, I don't know if this presentation is going to really touch on this this overall topic that Ms. Jones's comment raised, which is an excellent topic, and I'm really thankful for the good conversation that's begun here. That's actually an ongoing conversation, but I'm saying the conversation that's happening this evening. I'm not sure if this presentation is going to touch on that, but maybe it'll stimulate further discussion on the topic. So I'm just going to walk through an anticipated timeline and sequence for developing the programming elements for the new facility. So let's just dive in here. A little bit of background. As we heard earlier, the construction has begun. The new facility's scheduled to open in 2023. It's designed to be a complex multi-generational center with a wide range of programs and services all under one roof. It's a very complex project, quite a bit of workload to build it, to plan for it, to program it, to operate it. And so developing those various programming elements, which is the topic of discussion tonight, will require careful planning and sequencing over time. And that's really the focus for tonight, is just to get this out there for discussion, the timeline that is. It is a community effort with multiple stakeholders, and to Ms. Jones's point, certainly neighborhood residents first and foremost. No intent in the order. There was no particular intent there other than to emphasize that neighborhood residents is really where this project came from, and it's a Menlo Park project for the residents of Menlo Park, especially neighborhood residents. The key stakeholders, of course, are the city council, who are the governing body of the city and who set all the direction and policy really for all of our operations. And the city council has formed a subcommittee of the council comprised of Vice Mayor Nash and Council Member Taylor, who, as we all know, represents District 1. And they have a further working group of some additional residents to help advise that subcommittee. A number of those working group members are here in the audience tonight. Thank you all for being here. Of course, there are advisory bodies whose role is to advise the city council on matters pertaining to the operations programs of libraries and parks and recreation facilities. And these are the two commissions here tonight. And there's numerous other neighborhood groups, community groups, individuals, volunteers, external partners, all who have an interest, a stake in this project and being successful. So that's just the intent here to say it goes well beyond this group of folks here, but in particular, it's very much focused on folks in the neighborhood and who really I think are responsible ultimately for making this dream a reality through their tireless advocacy. So some of the programming goals, as pointed out earlier in Ms. Jones's comments, are really about fulfilling that vision, which really is a neighborhood vision of this multi-generational community center that I know has been talked about for quite some time, going back to the Belhaven visioning process of 2013 and even earlier, to have high quality services and programs that are inclusive, and in particular for neighborhood residents, as the conversation we've just been having kind of emphasizes, fostering that sense of belonging, safety, and welcome to visitors, and especially neighborhood residents. So especially so neighborhood residents don't feel like they suddenly don't belong in some brand new facility, that it is really for them. I know that's a concern we heard quite a bit, in sort of the earlier phases of developing this specific project. And of course, that it's an inspiring place for creativity, community, learning, discovery, wellness, and growth for people of all ages. That's the multi-generational piece. Other programming goals, all of which, are kind of pulled together from all of the community input we've heard up to this point in the process. Of course, providing those traditional programs that were there before, the main components that are comprising the new facility of a library, recreation center, senior center, after school care and swim center being chief among them. The intent of the new center is to have synergies by those items, those functions being together, and to leverage them even through new and innovative programs, combining the different populations, seniors, young people, so forth together, and to create new high quality programs that previously were not available but are made possible by the new facility. So a good example of that is the new facility will feature a makerspace, which is something that doesn't exist in the previous facilities, but it is a part of this program, and there's some others. So moving in, so the focus of this study session tonight is to review a draft timeline and sequence for developing those various elements, library programming, youth center, swim center, etc., over the next several months, and to receive feedback from this commission and by extension, the members of the public who are here tonight to provide their comments at the beginning of the process, which again is going to be an involved process with multiple stakeholders. This is just kind of the beginning of it, and by no means the entirety of it. This study session is not focused on developing the programming elements themselves in any detail. It's really just about looking at this timeline to give a sense of the scope of this undertaking, to identify the components and get that initial kind of feedback. And we fully anticipate additional feedback coming from, in particular, the MPCC subcommittee of the City Council and their working group that they pulled together of some additional residents. And also, this study session is not focused on naming the new facility. I know that's a topic of great interest to a number of members in the community. That will take place under a separate process as directed by the City Council. So just to clarify kind of the focus, just as a refresher, I think everyone in the room here is familiar with the main components of the facility, the layout here. I'll just quickly note that, as mentioned before, here's the existing Kelly Park track and field. Off to the side here are the basketball, and tennis, and pickleball courts. This whole area is essentially going to remain the same, aside from some new carports with solar panels over the parking area. The new facility is going to be located here, which is kind of set back from where the existing facility or the previous facility was. The previous facility kind of was a little bit farther forward in the site. So that's the overview of it. I believe everyone's familiar with the main components, with the first level of having the gymnasium, the youth center or after school care center, children's library, senior lounge, and dining hall with commercial kitchen, some outdoor terraces, some locker rooms to service the gym, and some of the upstairs recreation and fitness functions. And then off to the bottom of this view is the pool, not shown here. So that's the first floor. And then upstairs on the second level of the facility, the library, not children's, but kind of the rest of the library functions kind of in the center here. Off to the left, a fitness studio, a movement or dance studio, a flexible classroom here, the makerspace that I just mentioned, a lounge specifically for teens, for youth. And then a couple of pools, one is a lap pool, one is an instructional pool, and the addition of a splash pad. So here's like kind of a new feature that we're able to kind of squeeze in there for, especially for like young children to splash in the water. This particular layout's a little bit out of date. This is from an April presentation. So some changes have been made to the entries into the pool for disabled access, people who are differently able to access, but the general sense of two pools is the same. Just these next few slides basically kind of take the chart that's shown in the staff report in the, I think it's attachment D, and just kind of want to walk through quickly and then get some thoughts from those present just about those various components and timeline. So we're looking at 12 months of more in-depth discussions about how to program this facility, including how to ensure that neighborhood residents have that access, first and foremost. That's part of the programming and part of the policy. First up would be an analysis and some direction from the City Council, ultimately about the aquatics program, how that can and should be operated, and what are some of the goals there related to cost and so forth. Then moving into in the February timeframe, and this roughly coincides with, the monthly sessions of these commissions, as well as whatever schedule that the MPCC subcommittee and working group decide. So you can see senior center, makerspace, the library on the second floor being contemplated as happening in the February timeframe, then moving into March, moving into some further discussion about the teen space, fitness center, gymnasium, and movement studio to round out the first quarter of 2022. I'll back up a second and say all this is in draft form, totally subject to change, totally up for discussion. But key is that these are all main components of the facility, each of which really needs a deeper dive in order to develop the programming plan for. So that's the reason for breaking it out like this. Moving into the next quarter, you see in April, May, and June, kind of rounding out some of the programming functions with the children's library, the youth center, the meeting rooms, dining hall and kitchen, and then kind of at the tail end, looking at how do volunteers and potential external partners engage, like content providers, for example, or nonprofits that may have programming that would fit into the facility and could provide some of that content for the neighborhood and community benefit. And to basically the overarching kind of message here is completing the programming discussions in the first half of calendar year 2022, if possible, because of the level of planning, any staffing, budget authorizations that may need to happen, kind of need to get that solidified more or less in the first half of the calendar year, including the plan for the library opening day collection and many other things like that. And then moving into the second half of the calendar year of 2022, starting to dive into more details. And I think, oops, my apologies, especially when you look at things like in September, you see memberships, fees, the question about focus on residents or non-residents, neighborhood residents versus residents of outside the neighborhood, diving a little bit more into those policy discussions, which ultimately in many ways are really a subject to direction from the city council, but certainly having input from community members and stakeholders and the subcommittee is incredibly important. And then you see on the right side, some of these operational elements begin to really take shape as far as, what does the registration system need to be and look like, putting together a concrete staffing plan for the facility, concrete maintenance plan for the facility and those associated costs. And then as we move into the second half of, the end of calendar year 2022, kind of pivoting to policies that sort of reflect the direction and the feedback that had been given up to that point. What are the policies for using and accessing the meeting rooms and the makerspace and the fitness center and the facility overall, and inclusion policies for folks who are differently abled. And then over on the right side, you kind of start to see some more of the more detailed, intensive operational plans that in particular on the staff side we need to have, such as emergency preparation, safety plans, ultimately a budget authorization that would go to the city council, potentially if one is needed there. The plans for moving in. We're currently operating, as Mr. Howard mentioned earlier, the services are still going, all in different locations. Ultimately, they need to move back in. So we need a whole plan for doing that. Decommissioning the Belhaven branch library, which is currently located at Belhaven School, and turning that back over to the school is a whole element in and of itself. And then as we kind of move into 2023, preparing for many things. These three bullets are by no means all of them, grand openings, facility tours, event calendars, and many other things. And just like a taste of some of the other things that kind of happen more around the opening and post-opening time frame is confirming the shelter agreement with the Red Cross, because this building is intended to function as an emergency shelter. And heaven forbid we ever need it for that, but it would be ready for that if it's needed. LEED and Nze certification. LEED is leadership and environmental energy efficient design. It's the green certification for the building. The goal is LEED Platinum for this building, which is the highest level of certification. Nze is net zero energy. The building is intended to be, it's all electric, and it is intended to have solar panels on site that will generate enough energy to offset 100% of the energy that the building consumes. So that's net zero energy. And in addition, there's an innovative microgrid, kind of like a battery array to make it really basic, that can even store some of that energy throughout the day, and in particular to power the building in the event of like a power loss in an emergency, and cooling center and many other things of that nature. So that's an overview. I know it was in the staff report, but I wanted to make sure that it was here in the presentation for discussion purposes. And we've arrived at the discussion portion. Happy to answer any questions and really look forward to the additional comments. Thank you.
So this time I have the staff liaison call for public comment on this topic.
Thank you, Chair Earhart. If anyone would like to make a public comment on this item, please use that raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're dialing in, press *9. Checking to see, I don't see any hands raised. Anyone like to make public comment? Seeing none.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to open up for joint commission discussion and questions and comments. I guess I'm going to start it off since I have the floor right now. And bear with me, Sean and Nick, if this question is too abstract, so help me. But I look at this, I look at the library, the branch library component of this story as being one of comparing what it would have been had we continued on with the standalone Belhaven branch replacement, which was the path we were on 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, versus what we have now. So for me, the null hypothesis is, how does it compare to what we would have had with a standalone branch library? So is it possible to describe or articulate how whether or not with this combined facility we'll have more, less, or the same in terms of the library component, what would have been the library branch in the new facility? And I'm not quite sure you can answer tonight, but I am interested in understanding whether or not we have gained, lost, or held ground relative to what we would have had Meta not stepped forward and made the proposal that they did. Obviously, there are advantages of what we have going on right now, synergies, but I am interested as a library commission member and a Belhaven resident to understand, have we traded off something that the Belhaven community would have gotten with a standalone branch, in the consequence of doing this joint project?
That's a really great question. And the first thing that comes to mind is we're getting this project. So it's something that's under construction. And I think, we were having a lot of conversations with the neighborhood about what they wanted to see in a new branch library. And the size that we were planning was larger than the size of the library components in this combined facility. But we had not gotten to the point of talking about funding for that standalone branch library. And that's a pretty big hurdle to get past. So that's one thing. The second thing is a lot of the discussions from the focus groups and the meetings that we held centered around community gathering places. Even though we were talking about a new branch library, there were a lot of people who were talking about, we need places for students and tutors to get together. We need places for people to hold small group meetings for business generation. We need places for like holding a city council meeting here in the Belhaven neighborhood. So there were a lot of elements in that discussion about a library space that weren't traditional library functions. And I think those sorts of functions are captured in the new facility. So even if the footprint of the library per se, strictly library space, may not be the same as what we were talking about before, I think the ideas that the neighborhood came forward with are captured pretty well in this new facility. And I'll stop there and see if Sean has anything he wants to add to that.
Nick, I think you stated it quite well. And I'll just like give one example. I do think it's definitely a net positive. This facility over kind of what had been contemplated for a standalone library. I think the recommendation that the city council had made back then was 10,000 square foot facility. The library square footage in this plan, if you just strictly from what's labeled library on there, is comparable to the current branch library, around 3,500 square feet. But it's wrapped around by another 30,000 plus feet of incredible community amenities, a community facility. One thing we've noticed with the senior center being temporarily located at the Arriaga Recreation Center and then the main library just on the other side of the campus there, is many of the participants of the senior center have the advantage of they can attend the senior center. They could also pop over to the library and check out library books. They have access to more activities in the same facility. That's something that the standalone branch library would not have been able to offer to visitors to the library. So in that regard, if you consider that overall the scale and the programs being offered in the facility are many times greater than just the library component, I would characterize it as definitely a bigger and better than the standalone library.
And can I add to that too, Sean, as well? Being that the new library will be centered or right next door to the child care after school program, which proposes a bunch of opportunities to make sure that classes, events, or even activities with the library could be full, right? And the tutoring opportunity. So I think it just hosts a wealth of opportunity to be triggered, like on hands, on site, right then and there, being next door to each other. So I think that poses another opportunity, which kind of enhances this space, even though it's compact to what you guys were talking before in the past.
But Commissioner Hadrovich has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to just come back a little bit to the theme of the thing that I was asking Mr. Howard earlier, and also just related to my recollection when I first came on the commission and went and toured, I think it was Mitchell Library in Palo Alto, long before Facebook, now Meta's generous offer. And what I recall that the librarians in Palo Alto sort of gave as a cautionary tale was that they had a community center / library that had a lot of different spaces, and they had a lot of high hopes for being able to use those for activities related to the library. And what the librarian told us at that time was that, in fact, those spaces became, and please, anyone that was there, Nick, I know you were there, anyone else that was there, if I'm getting this wrong, please correct me. But as I recall, the librarian said that in reality, those spaces became an income generating source for the city, and very often the library was not able to use those spaces in a way that was productive for the library. So going back to the questions that I asked and my concern about whether local community members were being winnowed out of spaces because of profit generating uses of those spaces, I for sure, knowing that the library that's being built is a little bit smaller than what we had envisioned, and that there are going to be a lot of spaces being used, would certainly be concerned about that. And I was looking at the slides you just showed us where there was talk about memberships and fees and things that would be happening, I think, late in the year in 2022. But for sure, I would be really interested in knowing what, if any, requirements are going to be needed in these spaces to earn income, so that we don't find ourselves with the after school kids, but no space for them because those rooms are being rented out. And also on the weekends, those rented out. So to the extent that we have some vision for those specific places to be library program spaces, is there going to be set-asides for that?
Yeah, that's a excellent observation and comment. So just to kind of get back to that, the memberships fees bullet points, I think the intent there is to have a conversation, about that very question. To what extent, do these spaces, should they be accessible to neighborhood folks, to community members, as opposed to activities that are maybe more geared strictly for like revenue generation, as you mentioned and observed at the Mitchell Park Library and Community Center. I think I have a sense of, I certainly know, my perspective on it as a background in particular in public libraries and social services, that I tend to be oriented toward what does the community need and how do we meet it through our services, with revenue being maybe a little bit secondary in the thinking. However, as a city organization, a big part of recreation programs does involve some cost recovery. So that is a policy discussion that in particular kind of rests with the city council. They establish the city's master fee schedule. They establish the city's cost recovery policy for activities. All of that certainly would be reviewed of a piece in that time frame or a time frame before we open the new facility, because it's a very important question, and those policies kind of provide that direction. And I know that the City Council and the MPCC subcommittee and working group, and I think all observers, are open to and welcome this kind of input from advisory bodies, from community members, to help inform the decision that they're going to make there. So I just want to be very clear that it's very well known that that's a big question for this facility. That at the end of this process, we want to come out with some direction from the City Council. I think what we're doing now and over the next 12 months is engaging as robust of a engagement, in particular with neighborhood residents and community members, as possible to help inform that decision that the council is ultimately going to make.
Looks like we have Chair Thomas, and then I lost to see who was next under Commissioner Bryman or Commissioner Joshua, but we'll go with Chair Thomas first, and then Commissioner Joshua, and then Commissioner Bryman.
Sure. So I have a question about programming and how decisions around programming get made, and how the commission can be, provide the best feedback to the staff in this regard, and also to kind of start figuring out how the PRC Commission and I guess the Library Commission, the LC, can best collaborate in the future. So I guess my question is, just to make it concrete, let's say that in our respective March meetings, we discuss fitness center programming. And just to make this concrete, let's say that we're discussing something like rules about personal trainers and whether or not they should be allowed. I'd love to get a sense of how you see that process taking place. And maybe I'll just throw out like a straw man would be maybe that the staff provide some background and maybe even a suggestion about kind of perhaps a policy that they would recommend to address this. And then my sense is that we would discuss it in the commission. And I'm curious, like, what's the step after that? Would the staff make the final decision? Would the feedback from the commission be communicated to the city council? Would they make the final decision? So for a lot of these like policy and programming decisions kind of around the MPCC, like what does that decision making process look like? And how can we provide the most valuable feedback for you?
That's a great question. So just to use that example of fitness center, One approach to take would be to, first of all, review what the fitness center, the former Onetta Harris Community Center campus had a fitness center in it. So we kind of review how that operated. Then look at what some other publicly operated fitness centers in the region, how they are operated. I think certainly synthesizing the feedback that we've heard overall, much of which is sort of oriented toward how do we make sure that neighborhood residents and Menlo Park residents, but especially neighborhood residents, have access to that facility, and make maybe some initial recommendations or sort of options on that regard. For the commission, then to provide feedback, observations, possibly even a recommendation for one particular approach for the city council to consider. Ultimately, the deciding body in the city for questions related to fees, cost recovery, access to city facilities generally rest with the city council, or they do rest with the city council. So ultimately, that's where the decision point comes. However, our city council is incredibly attuned to the needs of the community. All 5 of them are there because they want to help make the community a better place for our residents. And I think my impression in talking with all the city council members about this project in particular is that there's a deep understanding that this project is being built primarily for neighborhood residents, kind of in response to the need for a new facility, but also kind of the changes that have been happening in the neighborhood, especially in recent years. And so I hope that helps answer your question, but that's like kind of one example of how that process might play out and how the commissions kind of plug into it.
Commissioner Joshua.
I have a question on the reasoning for the inclusion of a kitchen and a dining room. Are you looking here at cost recovery and revenue generation? Because that's the way that I would see it as going forward. I'm not sure where I see the day-to-day use in it unless there's actually a plan or a community request to have those services there.
That's a great question, and maybe I'll look to Mr. Howard to talk a little bit about the senior center program and then kind of the use of the rental of the dining hall.
So with the senior, with the kitchen, what's happened in the past as far as seniors, they do provide a luncheon every day for our seniors. And it's at a low price as far as its cost, but it's restaurant style. So they're generating meals Monday through Friday for our seniors. And so in a way, it kind of generates something just to keep that function running for that kitchen and for that program. But if we talk about cost recovery in a whole, that kitchen space in the past for Onetta was attached to our multi-purpose room, which kind of worked hand in hand. So rental space and now having a new capacity or having a more functioning kitchen that can do more than what it was, because before it was more of a warming station. So we didn't really allow too much in there, and it's still going to be of a warming station, but just a little bit more advanced. So I think that function will definitely be a key part as far as some type of revenue being generated for the facility, for sure.
So just as a follow-up, then you're talking about the dining room. Do you see that as a multi-purpose room?
Yes.
Okay.
So that'll be a multi-functional room. After once that the seniors, they usually operate, let's say 8 to 3. And that's kind of Monday through Friday, unless they have a special event, it may run a little over. But in between that, we'll say around 4 o'clock is when that can turn into a multicultural room where it can be changed. We're planning, I believe, with the plans that's there now, that room can be shared or split with the divider into two. So now you have two functioning rooms at the same time that can generate some type of revenue. So that will happen in the later parts of the evening, being if need be.
The senior meals, are they 7 days a week?
5 days.
5 days.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rhondella, for all that commentary. The only thing I would kind of add to that in response to your question, Commissioner Joshua, is the rental of the hall is in a way, I mean, there's cost recovery there because you rent the space because there are costs associated with maintaining it and all of that. It's also a community service. People need spaces to have family celebrations. Whether that's a wedding reception or birthday parties, other gatherings. There aren't that many spaces that are accessible, to community groups to have a gathering. So it's kind of an interesting blend of, in one hand, it's a little bit of a revenue generating cost recovery tool, but on the other hand, it's an amenity and a service that community members want and need and use quite a bit.
Commissioner Bryman.
It would seem to me, in the vein of the inclusionary aspect of what we're trying to get to here, is that the facility is going to be what it is. The design has been done. You saw pictures of it. This room is going to be here. That room is going to be there. It's going to be attached to a kitchen. That we likely, with respect to programming, should go back to the community. Look, we're not making decisions. The community is not making decisions. It's been made very clear to us that the city council is making the decisions. But we need to do as much as we can, including community support with respect to how that decision gets made, right? So the more input that we can get from the community in terms of programming, with the understanding that, look, nobody's going to get everything that they want, but it would seem to me that if inclusionary thinking is part of the issue here, that the first thing we should do is to say, hey, this is what we've got. How do we want to use it? Right? And then in terms of buying tickets and classes and things, who gets access at what price, those are things that we're going to certainly be able to work out. Or who gets first dibs on renting the space at what rate? Is it a discounted rate based on your income? Is it, all that kind of stuff. It just seems that's, again, our job to facilitate that and to sort of inform the city council, who clearly wants this to be this community-centered thing above all else, that we should give them as much of that as we can.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And I think hopefully by displaying a potential timeline for diving into those details, certainly here in the commissions, but also with the understanding that there is the MPCC subcommittee and the working group kind of talking about some of those same issues, just to give space and time for all of that public engagement to happen, because it does take time. And so I think one sort of overarching kind of takeaway, I think, from just looking at it mapped out like this, at least that I have, is that it takes several months, and breaking out the different components gives room for each of those conversations to really kind of solicit that input that I think the city council really wants to help inform the decisions that they ultimately make.
Chair Thomas has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean, and all the staff for putting this together. I think this timeline seems reasonable, and I like how it's kind of broken down into these themes of, first focusing on programming, then focusing more on policies, and then kind of the opening steps start to begin. I would love to hear from, I guess, the other commissioners. I think part of the purpose of this meeting was to figure out how we should collaborate moving forward. And I'll quickly throw out, my thoughts maybe to get this started. I think that, this is broken down so nicely that we can probably just add this to the agendas of our respective meetings. And then maybe every once in a while, maybe quarterly or semi-annually, have meetings like this, where we get back together and then maybe we review a lot of the things that have covered, and maybe, areas of joint concern, or where we've kind of landed on different sides of issues. But I think like this is laid out so nicely, it kind of maps really well to our kind of meeting cadence and agendas. So I think, we can probably move forward somewhat independently, and then maybe at some cadence, maybe semi-annually, kind of sync. I'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Chair Earhart.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Chair Thomas. If I look at the layout by month that we looked at there, under the programming elements aspect of it, I mean, at the very least, it looks like in February there's a library component to the program elements conversation. In April, there's a children's library. I guess I'd be interested in understanding how many of those topics, in the through 2023 are distinct in the sense that there isn't any overlap, meaning they really could be looked at individually and then basically just consolidated. In which ones the commissioners feel like there needs to be a collaborative discussion. That there's benefit from a joint conversation about that. Because like the meeting space one in October is also an aspect of what would have been the Belhaven branch replacement, would have had an aspect associated with meeting rooms. So I guess the simple recommendation would be that there'd be a joint session in the February 2022 where content would be, there'd be content which would cover both commissions. April. And then, do we want to do it that way? Do we want to talk about having joint commission meetings where there's content in the programming elements proposal from staff that would, again, benefit from a collaborative conversation about it?
I'll just chime in from the staff's perspective. We're happy to facilitate any such collaborative conversations among the commissions. I think both chairs, I think, articulated what seems a very sensible approach and very doable from staff's perspective. It does look like there's a lot of opportunities for a little bit of individual work and then coming together. That sounds like a pretty good approach from our perspective, from my perspective, and I think I also speak for Nick and Rhondella on that.
Commissioner Hadrovich.
Yes, my only comment would be that I think the fact that we have 8 attendees at this event tonight really speaks well for us having joint commission meetings. I don't know how many people generally show up at the Parks and Rec meetings, but we don't regularly get 8 people at the Library Commission. And I think that maybe having this many people show up, I think perhaps speaks to the fact that the community is concerned about how these 2 different areas of community accessibility and activity are really going to partner together. And so while I do think it definitely makes sense that we would each have our own meetings and lines of thought about the clearly defined spaces that are going to be for each department, if you will, and definitely the policies, I think that there's a lot of concern about how all of this is going to work together seamlessly to provide the best service. And, you know, even if it means that by us combining, we get people saying, okay, I definitely want to show up and spend time listening to these two groups, or just listening to the reports that are given to both of these groups. That to me is worth noting and worth exploring why it is valuable for us all to meet together. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair Thomas, I was writing. Go ahead.
No worries. Okay, so it sounds like some of the feedback is that there is interest in, you know, continuing to discuss these things jointly. I guess a few concerns I have are, first, both commissions have other things on their agenda that have nothing to do with the MPCC, and so they probably need the kind of space of their separate meetings to get through, you know, some of that kind of separately. Is a more efficient use of everyone's time. And the second thing I guess I'd have a concern about is attendance, because now we would need quorum by both parties. And I know today for the PRC, you know, we're right at the limit. And if one more person couldn't have made it, then my understanding is this meeting couldn't happen. So there might be some challenges around that. And then the last thing would be that I guess jointly discussing this many items each week, it's a lot to get through. And while it's great to try to include as many commissioners as possible, I could also see at times having it being advantageous to discuss these in smaller groups so that each person gets to elaborate, you know, more, and we can make sure that we get through all of the items. So I think we'll probably have to find like some balance between individual meetings and the joint meetings. But yeah, I'd love to keep hearing other commissioners' feedback on this topic.
Commissioner Hadrovich.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come back and say I really wasn't advocating that we meet all of us every single month together. And certainly I think if we were to meet again, it would make sense to meet on the night when you have your commission meetings, which is maybe on Tuesdays, you know, if we're going to meet more than once, to go back and forth so that it's not always inconvenient for one group or the other. I just felt it was worth noting that we got a lot of people showing up, and just the few things that got aired so far, I think, show that there are a lot of things that it would make sense for us to work on together. And maybe even it makes sense to have a subcommittee that has people from both commissions, so that we can, you know, the subcommittee works together and then reports back to the individual commissions. But you know, the fact that we have quite a few people from the community listening in, just to me, is one marker that says this is valuable time. Maybe if we got together twice a year or quarterly, or I don't know, once in a blue moon, but it seems worth it to me. So that's all. Thanks.
That subcommittee suggestion with subcommittee members from two commissions is a very interesting idea. I don't know if the commissions would be interested in pursuing that. I could reach out to the city clerk and see like what the rules are surrounding that, because I'm not familiar with the rules regarding that. I'm pretty sure that it's been done before in the city. I'm not familiar right now with what that would look like, or what the rules would be surrounding that.
And while we're kind of just talking about more like procedural things, subcommittee sounds like a really worth exploring. So thanks, Nick, for outlining that. And since both commissions do have meetings at this point calendared in December, you know, that could be the opportunity to kind of firm that up. The other thing procedurally I just want to note is that the regular meetings of each commission, are posted. It's the third Mondays of the month for the Library Commission and the fourth Wednesdays of the month for the Parks and Recreation Commission. There's nothing to prevent the commissions from calling a special joint meeting in addition to of those meetings, and you just have to take certain actions at a meeting to kind of call special meetings. So just know that that's a tool in the toolkit should it become necessary.
Okay. Nick.
Oh, Commissioner Leap, go ahead.
I'm curious about our December meeting. Is that something that we can discuss?
Later in
We'll do that in the context of the calendar.
Great.
Okay, let me see if I can sort of wrap up the conversation a bit here. I guess I'm going to characterize it as there's certainly from the Library Commission standpoint, there's been some desire expressed to have, I'll say some future collaborative meetings with the Parks and Recreation Commission, and with the potential of it being something that's asynchronous from the regular meetings, either as a special session for the full joint commissions or a subset of, a subcommittee formed out of members from both commissions. We don't need to take a motion or take a vote this evening on this. I guess I am interested in if we ask staff to provide some feedback, about what mechanism, do we have at our disposal. Then we could come back and potentially at each individual meeting assess whether or not that's, we could decide if we want to do that in the individual commissions, and based on that, would then determine what the collaborative meeting process would be. Does that seem reasonable?
That seems reasonable. You might, Chair Earhart, also want to set up maybe a standing touch base meeting with Chair Thomas, just to kind of, I can run back and forth to sort of information share, but just to have maybe at the separate planning meetings, maybe I'll start for the commissions. We have a planning meeting for members of the public with the chair of the commission and staff prior to every commission meeting. Maybe I'll just start inviting you both to the planning meetings for the other commission, just so that there's that opportunity to sort of coordinate.
That would be good. I guess specifically as it relates to reporting back with any proposals as far as, whether or not a subcommittee process could work for the two commissions. I think maybe a joint session between you and I and Chair Thomas would be an opportunity to take something back to our commissions. That would be my recommendation. Okay.
Yeah, and I can explore that idea with the city clerk and report back to you guys.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, with that, I guess we're going to close out this topic on the agenda tonight. Thank you for the great questions and for the interaction. Thank you, staff, for the preparation and the accepting the questions and comments and giving feedback. Thank you very much for that. At this point, we'll transition to to section F of the agenda, the informational items. Informational items are transmitted to the library and the Parks and Recreation Commissions in staff's effort to provide an update on matters of importance to the commission. Informational items are not action items, however, a commissioner, city staff member, or member of the public may request to make a comment or ask a question on any of the informational items. This evening on the for F1, we do have the calendar for the Library Commission to review. So Commissioner Leap, this would be the point where we talk about the December meeting. At this time, we have not identified specific topics for the December meeting.
Yeah, just I think at earlier Library Commission meetings, it had been discussed not holding that December meeting, sort of taking a holidays break there. And just a couple of things going forward into the new year, to note that because of the third Monday cadence of the Library Commission, the first 2 months of 2022 will need to change the meeting dates because they both fall on holidays.
Great. Yeah, and I guess we had also kind of held off on making a decision about canceling the 20th, December 20th meeting, based on whether there was some Library Commission interest in meeting in December to reflect on and make plans based upon this evening's content. So if there was a desire on the part of the commission to not wait 2 months or so before we would reflect on or speak to what we're going to do next with the information we received tonight, then that would potentially be a candidate for December's meeting. But I am certainly open to taking the month of December off from a meeting standpoint. So we don't formally vote. I guess Nick, do you want to take a sort of a voice vote or a vote of acclamation relative to canceling the Library Commission meeting in December?
I think if we're not, do we need a vote, Sean, on canceling the meeting, or can it be something that's done sort of as the chair schedules it?
There have been occasions in the past where the meeting just had to be canceled at the prerogative of the chair. I would say, since you have more than a quorum of the Library Commission here this evening, I think maybe just a general acclamation, to not meet in December would be sufficient. You could take the formality of a vote, however, I don't think it's required.
So what do you
Well, I'm
say?
not quite sure how we go about acclamation unless someone just simultaneously says I'm for it. I mean, I guess not sure how that.
Stop sharing screen and thumbs up or thumbs down. That's what we do in kindergarten.
Sorry about that. I forgot that I was still screen sharing.
But in all, thumbs up if you want to have the meeting, thumbs down if you do not want to have the meeting.
Well,
Discussion permitted.
So that's 4 library commissioners there who aren't interested in having the December meeting. So
actually, what I was going to say is I'm actually going to be traveling most of December, but I was just looking at the fact that we don't seem to have anything on the agenda right now. And if the only thing we would be doing is discussing tonight's meeting, then I think for sure we could do that in January. I don't know if anything would be coming up where, David, you might be building an agenda with Nick and Sean at your planning session, where suddenly it would seem like there were more things than just the discussion of tonight. And so to me, we just need we need to tease out a little bit more information about if there are things we would have to talk about in December, because there's nothing on our tentative schedule for now. But if there's not anything except discussing what happened tonight, I think it's fine to wait until January. I think a lot of great stuff has come out of tonight that I'm interested in parsing out as part of our Library Commission, and then planning moving forward how we're going to use the information we got tonight. Sorry to be long-winded,
No,
but that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Sure. I guess what I would propose is we don't cancel the planning meeting and try to arrive at some understanding of what we could then bring into the January meeting as the joint, what aspect of the joint process we're going to do. So we don't lose a month in terms of making progress on this topic tonight, but it doesn't need to be a commission meeting in which to take the next step on it.
Okay, so it sounds like we'll keep the agenda planning meeting, and I'll invite Chair Thomas to that one as well. And but
contingent on that you've got some sort of story to tell around what the clerk tells you. Okay.
I'm not into holding meetings if we don't have a use for holding a meeting.
Okay.
So.
Can we bring the calendar back up again then, please? So just to clarify, the February 28th meeting, it says MPCC programming elements. So that would be speaking to the library second floor content, for example?
And that's the intent, put that
Okay.
placeholder there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I would just ask that, that we just make that annotation that so it kind of matches what you have in the proposed content
Can do.
from attachment D. Okay. All right. If there's additional comment or discussion on the library commission calendar, then we will proceed with it as we've just annotated it. Thank you. With that, I'll hand it back to Chair Thomas.
Thanks, Chair Earhart. Assistant Director Nick, would you mind sharing the tentative agenda? And then maybe I'll quickly summarize. So we are planning to have this December 8th meeting. We'll have a subcommittee report, which is exciting. And we're starting to queue up a lot of things I think there'll be a lot of discussion around in the future. So pickleball, the aquatics program, and some stats on contracting these programs out or not. More recently, there's been some complaints about dogs, and so we're going to try to scope that and bring that up in the future as well. So a lot of exciting stuff on the agenda. And now, Assistant Director Nick, do we have any public comment on this item?
Still have some attendees. Thank you for sticking with us all the way to the end. If anyone would like to make a comment on this item, the agenda planning calendar for the Parks and Recreation Commission, please use that raise hand function now. Seeing no comment.
Okay, great. We can open this up if any other PRC commissioners want to comment. Now's the time, and otherwise we can hand things back to Chair Earhart. Seeing none, Chair Earhart, back to you.
I'm just going to make one comment. Because there are members missing from the PRC commission, that they be canvassed on the December 8th meeting, so to make sure you do have quorum. So just independently, please
It's a
check.
very good point. I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair Earhart, do you want to take over?
Thank you, Chair Thomas. So we're gonna finish off this evening's agenda with commissioner reports, and actually, so this would be, I'm not sure how it is in the Parks and Rec Commission, but in the Library Commission meeting, there's a point where commissioners can report out on either activities that with their liaison groups that they're involved with, or other comments of note relative to Library Commission activities. I will start it off by saying I really enjoyed the groundbreaking ceremony 2 Saturdays ago. I thought it was very well done. It was well represented from a city leadership standpoint, from a community standpoint as well. I do appreciate the effort that went into that to make it special. And then the second point was the Library Commission work plan was sort of commented on in the consent calendar at the council meeting on Tuesday, and was accepted without comment, I guess would have been the way to describe it. So that was kind of anticlimactic, I guess, in terms of what I thought was going to go on with that. So anyway, that's my update for this month.
Any other commissioners have, oh, Commissioner Hadrovich.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to agree with you. I also was at the groundbreaking and thought it was a wonderful event. And thanks to all the staff that did that. I also wanted to mention that I saw, I think in Menlo, but I probably knew about it from other sources, that in-person story time is kicking off again this week. And I think that that really is wonderful and a great and needed community event for the kids all over Menlo Park. And certainly I hope a sign that we are getting back to normal. And then the last thing that I just wanted to say now is I was not here last month. And so I did not get a chance to offer my welcome to our newest commissioner, Commissioner Singh. I'm really glad to see you here and glad you're part of our Library Commission, and I look forward to working with you. And also, let me just say to the Parks and Rec Commission, thank you so much for meeting with us. It's my pleasure to see all your faces, and I hope that we are all going to have a good working relationship and maybe get to be friends through this process. So thank you for the work you do as well.
Any other commissioner like to give a report out? Seeing none. Oh, wait, Chair Thomas.
Yeah, this has been a really productive session, and I think everyone on the Parks and Recs Commission is really looking forward to working together with everyone on the Library Commission. And thank you, staff, for doing a great job. I guess one thing is that I think we do have 6 members, and I believe we're in the process of looking for a new Parks and Rec commissioner. So I'd love to hear from the staff on that. And again, if any commissioners from either of the commissions know someone who might be interested, please let them know.
All right, seeing no additional commissioner reports at this time, I would officially adjourn the meeting, and the time is 8:37 p.m. And thank you so much for both commissions for your active engagement, and for staff for the quality of the report out and the dialogue and exchange with the 2 commissions. And with that, have a good evening, and guess most of you will see you in the new year at the next commission meeting for the library.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. Bye.
Thank
Good
you
to
very
see
much.
Good to meet you.
Thanks, guys.